expense can be a bit more detailed than just deducting how much you've spent on childcare. So let's get into some of the details. The amount that you can deduct for kids that are 6 on December 31st, 6 and under, is $8,000 per child. For any children 7 to 16, you are able to deduct on an annual basis $5,000 per child for childcare expense. The other thing to note is overnight camps. So the maximum you can deduct in a week for overnight camps for kids 6 and under is $175 per week. Another thing to note is that private tuition for schooling is not a tax deduction. So if you send your kids to private school, whether this is elementary or secondary, this is not a deduction for the parents. If there's childcare associated with before school and after school, that may be a childcare expense, but not for the actual education for the kids. The other thing that I highly recommend you do when you're filing your taxes, you do have to include the SIN number of the daycare or the person babysitting. And I highly recommend you get the SIN number now while you're filing, because if you don't provide the SIN number, CRA could disallow this as an expense. And I've seen when people fall out of touch with previous babysitters or they move away and they cannot get their SIN numbers after the fact. So get the SIN number now. You do not want this expense to be disallowed. The other key thing to note is that the lower income earner must deduct the childcare expense. So if you have a high income earner in the household and a lower income earner, the lower income earner must deduct the childcare expenses. But they can only deduct up to 2/3 of their income. And this is line 236 of your tax return. So please note that if you've got a lower income earner making a little bit of money and you're paying a lot for childcare expenses, you may not fully be able to utilize this expense if you're not earning enough income to fully deduct. Doesn't create a loss and you cannot carry this forward as well. Lastly, make sure that you are including the dates of birth and all your children on your tax returns when you're filing. You want to make sure